This was the kind of game where even the grass at Anfield looked tense. You know those matches where everyone's just holding their breath? Not because it's nonstop chaos, but because something might happen, something ought to happen, and you don't want to blink and miss it. This was that. A 98-minute pressure cooker with one lid-rattling moment of genius from Dominic Szoboszlai that cracked it open. 1-0 to Liverpool. Just that. One goal. But it felt like the kind of goal that echoes through the season like a church bell tolling on a cold morning. Loud. Clear. Unignorable. Liverpool are top of the table. Arsenal's unbeaten record is toast. And Szoboszlai? Well, he might have just pulled off the most ridiculous, most undeserved, most sublime robbery we've seen in the early season. Because let's be honest, this was not an attacking masterclass. It was not a swashbuckling, goal-laced showdown between two title contenders. This wasn't a 5-4 or a 4-3 or even a 2-all. This was chess and football boots. This was ice versus iron. Arsenal came with their strategy, calm, poised, missing two of their most influential players and still looking the more composed side. Liverpool looked, well, off-kilter. Out of rhythm. A little bit like they were trying to download their new identity on a dial-up connection. And yet, they won. Let's rewind. First half. 45 minutes of coiled tension with all the bite of a butter knife. Arsenal were cleaner, more fluid, even with Bukayo Saka in a bucket of ice somewhere and Odegaard sulking on the bench like a benched cello. They moved with intent, pressed with patience, and Madueke, was giving Milos Kerkez night terrors in real time. That was the one little spark Arsenal kept returning to, flicking the lighter, hoping it would catch. He twisted and turned, he danced on the right flank like the ghost of a winger from a more romantic era, and forced Alisson into the only save of note before the break. Liverpool? Flat. Mohamed Salah might as well have been in disguise, possibly wearing his own kit as camouflage. Hugo Ekitike, industrious, forgettable. Gakpo, present, technically. Wirtz looked like someone told him last minute this was a Champions League qualifier. The midfield was an IKEA table held together by two functioning legs and one wobbly screw. McAllister was that screw, and not in a good way. But the real twist? Szoboszlai, the Hungarian wildcard slotted in at right back again because apparently football positions are optional now, was everywhere. Playing like a man who had decided that if no one else was going to light the match, he'd burn the whole pitch down himself. Defensive duties? Sure, he bullied Martinelli into irrelevance. Forward thrust? Why not? Let's try that too. And then came the moment. The 83rd minute. A dead ball situation from roughly 32 yards, you know, that stretch of grass where commentators usually say he's not going to shoot from there, surely. But Szoboszlai doesn't live in a world of surely. He lives in a world where the ball whispers secrets to his right foot, and he listens. The hit was venom and poetry. Whipped, dipped, bent, kissed the air, and sliced past Raya like he wasn't even real. It didn't go in, it commanded its way into the net. A statement. A stunner. A snapshot of brilliance so sharp it could cut glass. Game over? Not quite. Arsenal woke up then, too late. As it came on, tried a flick here, a glide there. Odegaard found pockets. Timber hurled himself into the attack until his legs told him no more. But it was like trying to finish a novel when someone's already slammed the final page shut. Liverpool smelled the desperation and sat on it like a cat on a warm laptop. Gomez was brought on, turned into a one-man barricade. Jones ran like someone told him each pass added 10 years to his life. Even Chiesa, fresh from the bench and full of scampering, helped run the clock down in the ugliest, most beautiful way. And then we had the 7 minutes of purgatory. 7 minutes of hopeful balls and hopeful hearts. Of Arsenal loading the box like they were trying to beat the final boss with a stick. Of Timber crossing with cramp in both legs. Of Eze breaking through, only to be swaddled and smothered and swallowed whole by the defense. Of Gyökeres, Arsenal's marquee striker, looking like he was still trying to remember what league he was in. Let's talk about him for a second, shall we? Victor Gyökeres. This was supposed to be the statement, his coronation, and instead he delivered a performance so quiet you could hear the tumbleweeds rolling through his heat map. Outmuscled, outthought, and eventually just out of ideas. This was a man marking time, not making impact. And when you're wearing the 9 for Arsenal, you don't get to be invisible. Meanwhile, back on the Liverpool side, the new recruits were a mixed bag. Ekitike worked hard, but never quite clicked. Wirtz had flashes but looked overwhelmed by the tempo. Salah, let's not sugarcoat it, looked like a wax statue of himself, slowly melting. And yet, none of it mattered. None of it. Because the game had Szoboszlai. And that was enough. It's wild how football does this. A 90-minute standoff full of half moments and bad touches and failed passes. And then one flash, a swing of a boot, a curved missile, and suddenly everything else is noise. This wasn't a dominant Liverpool. It wasn't even a good Liverpool. But it was a Liverpool that had the one thing Arsenal didn't, a moment of genius that decided a match of mortals. The real sting, if you're Mikel Arteta, is knowing your team did so much right. They suffocated Liverpool for 45 minutes. They disrupted rhythm. They looked composed in the chaos. Zubimendi and Rice quietly conducted traffic. Marino was a neat little cog, spinning possession, linking chains. Timber looked like he could have played 6 positions at once if his hamstrings had let him. But it's that final line, that missing touch, that lack of ruthlessness. When Eze was through, you finish it. When Madueke's delivery drops into the box, someone crashes it. When you've got possession on the edge of the penalty area, you make it count. Instead, Arsenal fiddled and dithered, looking for the perfect incision while the wound closed up in front of them. You could hear it in Arteta's voice post-match. The pride, the frustration, the weariness. This was not a bad performance. It just wasn't enough. And at Anfield, not enough might as well be a resignation letter. Because Anfield doesn't forgive hesitation. Not when the stakes feel this heavy. Not when the wind itself seems to chant for the team in red. Let's talk about the tempo in this second half, because that's where it all changed. Not radically, not like someone flipped a switch, but more like a pot that finally started to simmer. The first half had that stately, suspicious energy, like 2 great minds eyeing each other across a chessboard, moving pieces, waiting for the other to flinch. But the second? Liverpool started to lean into it. They didn't suddenly become brilliant. They became determined. You could see it in the way Gravenberch, who, to be fair, had a quietly assertive game, began taking more risks, playing more vertically. You could see it in the way Wirtz, who had been ghosting around like a shy artist, finally snapped into space, turned, and hit that stinging shot that forced Raya into his first real scramble. And you could definitely feel it in the crowd, that Anfield growl starting to wake up from its first half nap. But Arsenal didn't fade. If anything, they doubled down. Rice kept prowling. Zubimendi kept knitting passes together like he was repairing a sweater in the rain. Timber was out there pulling double duty, first marking Gakpo, then chasing Salah, then picking up the ball himself and driving forward with the energy of a man trying to win an election. Then came the substitutions, the reshuffling, the right, now let's try something else phase. Slot brought on Jones and he immediately raised the energy. Suddenly, Liverpool had someone who wanted the ball in tight spaces, someone who would bite into tackles and then bite into the space after. Gomez came on for Konate, who went down and took half the collective blood pressure in Merseyside with him. But Gomez, faultless. One of those unflashy, ice-cold defensive cameos that doesn't make headlines, but wins games. And Arsenal? They rolled the dice. Odegaard jogged on, looking like a man who knew he was being handed a blunt knife and told to cut diamonds. Eze followed. There's a reason they paid for him. His feet are a lie detector test, and defenders fail them regularly. But Liverpool were ready. Slot had Liverpool playing like a side that knew they weren't better on the day, but were perfectly willing to outsuffer Arsenal. That's the thing. This wasn't a match won with flowing triangles or an overwhelming press. It was one with teeth-gritted pragmatism. Liverpool didn't outplay Arsenal. They outlasted them. And still, the game wasn't done. Not after that thunderbolt, not after that goal that will replay on highlight reels for a decade. You know the type, where the freeze frame looks photoshopped, because the ball is bending space-time, and the wall is still in mid-leap, and the goalkeeper is doing that full-body stretch that looks more like performance art than sport. That free kick moved, not floated, moved, as if it knew where the net was before it even left the ground. So Arsenal pushed. They pounded on the door, and it almost cracked. There was Eze gliding through the middle like some kind of ballet-trained burglar, There was Gyökeres, finally showing signs of life, pivoting, stretching, almost there. But Gomez slammed the door. Van Dijk, who had been so quiet all game you wondered if he was writing poetry back there, suddenly commanded. The final 10 minutes were Liverpool reverting to fortress mode. Full-backs tucked in, midfielders pressing every touch. And Alisson, mostly untested, standing like a silent warning. You know what's funny? For all the new signings and tactical tweaks, for all the rotating managers and transfer sagas and £70 million debates, this game came down to one moment. One strike. One human foot doing something ridiculous with a leather ball. That's the charm of it. You can spend hundreds of millions trying to build the perfect team, and then Szoboszlai just decides to break the game. Let's slow down here and actually appreciate him. Dominic Szoboszlai, playing out of position again at right back because apparently Arne Slot looked at his depth chart and said, you know who'd make a fantastic defender? The most technically gifted player on the team. But Szoboszlai isn't just playing right back, he's reinventing it. He's made that position his canvas. It's as if he's trolling the whole concept of positional football by dropping man-of-the-match performances while covering wingers and delivering 30-yard game winners. He shut down Martinelli, flat out erased him. Like a teacher confiscating a kid's phone, just nope. Not today. Then when Martinelli went off, he shrugged, wandered forward, and scored a goal that's going to haunt Arsenal's defenders every time they pass a wall or see a football spin in slow motion. Elsewhere, let's talk about Salah. Because we have to. He was there. Physically, in spirit, not so much. This was one of those nights where Salah looked like he'd downloaded the wrong firmware. The dribbles weren't clicking. The final ball was a memory. Maybe it's early season rust. Maybe it's the new system. But whatever it was, it left Liverpool without their usual cheat code. And yet, they still won. Arsenal's defenders had a mixed night. Calafiori looked steady but was caught once or twice playing passes that screamed Serie A tempo into a Premier League hurricane. Gabriel did what Gabriel does. Big blocks, big headers, the occasional heart attack. Mascara, thrown on early after Saliba's injury, looked raw but brave. But in the end, none of them could prevent that goal. And Saliba, his absence? Massive. You could feel the calm leave the Arsenal backline when he limped off. It was like pulling the battery out of a smartphone and wondering why nothing's loading. He's that guy. And without him, Arsenal's composure dimmed ever so slightly, just enough to let in doubt. And doubt at Anfield is a contagion. Let's not forget the managers. Slot, icy, minimalist, pulling strings from the shadows, making adjustments that made Liverpool harder to break than a student loan repayment plan. Arteta, intense, animated, pacing like a man who knows he brought the right notes, but someone changed the exam questions. He wanted more from his team. He knows they had enough to win that game. But sometimes the football gods just laugh in your face and hand the other team a thunderbolt. And Arsenal? They walked off heads up, because they weren't outplayed. They weren't embarrassed. They just lost. And that hurts more sometimes, when you do everything right, or almost everything right, and still come up empty. That's football's cruel magic. It doesn't care how tidy your triangles were. It only cares who made the net ripple. And so Liverpool sit top, perfect record intact. Not perfect performances, mind you, far from it. But points are oxygen, and they've got a lungful. And Arsenal, they go into the break with a blemish. One scar, one lesson. Maybe that will be the moment that sharpens them. Or maybe, as so often, it'll be the loss they keep looking back at in May, whispering, if only. This has been Across the Pitch. Over and out.